Well, welcome everyone to our discussion today of culture clash and identity loss, university mergers in Russia. And we have with us Ksenia Romanenko, who I will introduce in a moment. Let me say the topic of mergers is a perennial topic, I think, around the world. And whenever you get a real merger, a merger which actually pushes institutions together, you have issues about cultural clash and identity loss. So the example from Russia will have something to tell all of us about mergers, and it will also be specific to the situation that it describes. Let me take you through the webinar protocols. The usual rules of combat apply. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CGHE website pretty soon, usually within 48 hours, often in 24 hours. It winds up on YouTube, and we find that our webinars are watched more on YouTube now, of course, than they are on the actual day. A transcript of the chat function in the webinar will be also posted on the CGHE website afterwards. Now, please keep yourself muted during the webinar so we won't pick up all the astonishing background noises in your immediate environment. And of course, you stay in that condition until you've been asked to speak, like, for example, when you come into the Q&A discussion. There's no need to have your video on either, but again, we'd like you to turn it on when you come into the discussion section of the webinar. Now, we recommend using speaker view, in the top right-hand corner there of the screen, so you can more clearly see who is talking during the webinar. Now, to ask a question, use the chat function. Go into the chat, type your question or your statement that you want to make. And it's from that contribution to chat that I can identify you and bring you into the webinar. And we compose the Q&A more or less in the order that people come forward in the chat, not exactly, because sometimes the content suggests a somewhat different sequencing of the speakers. But generally, if you come in early, you'll end up in a discussion. If you come in late, you might miss out. Because what tends to happen is that our Q&A participants get the idea of wanting to participate in the last 10 minutes or so, and some come in and then miss out. Now, when you're invited to ask your question or make your statement in the Q&A, please unmute yourself, most important step, switch on your video, and then when you come in, you state your name and where you are from. Zoom is a fairly easy platform to use. And if you haven't used it before, don't hesitate to plunge in. Send me a note in the chat if you want to ask any questions about what to do next. Now, it's a pleasure to introduce Ksenia, a valued colleague from the High School of Economics in Moscow, where I have a continuing link. She's done a PhD in education, and I think, Ksenia, your PhD was about mergers. Yeah. So you'll be speaking about the area in which you're most expert. She's head of the master's program at HSC in evidence-based education development, research fellow at the Institute of Education. Her research interests include higher education policy, which you would have in common with many participants in today's webinar, I'm sure, Ksenia, qualitative methods in educational research, organizational ethnography, social identity issues, university culture, and organizational changes in higher education. So, floor is now yours. We look forward to the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Simon, and thank you, colleagues, and thank you for invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And yes, I will tell you about things I really like, I'm really interested in, and about the context, about my position in this presentation. That the first thing, I'm a research fellow in the Laboratory for University Development, and it's a part of our job to make academic and applied research about university reorganizations, university strategies. So it's a usual process to research mergers in Russia, because it's a big part of Russian higher education policy. And for example, now I'm in the process of a new applied project about university mergers. And the other part is this is data from my PhD thesis, and my PhD thesis was devoted to student side of university mergers and student role of university mergers, so that I will tell you about such an interaction between methodological and objects fields, because I'm interested in higher education policy and policies and organizations, and at the same time in the human side of these organizations and universities as organizations. And my focus will be on students because it's underrepresented group in not in higher education research, it's a very represented group, but in higher education policies. So that it's a begin. I will begin from the side, from the interview with graduate of the merged university. It was a very it was a very painful reorganization, and I really like this metaphor or this idiom to become an alumnus of unknown something, and I'm thinking that it's a very good metaphor for understanding human side of university mergers, when in addition to uncertainty and a lot of organizational problems, we can see this organizational identity issues and organizational culture issues, which can be more influential than some real changes. So that's what's going on usually in higher education research and in mergers research and education, that very often, and it's logical, that more attention is usually paid to transformation of organizational and administrative structures, on funding issues, on changes in academic strategies and profiles. But my interest is more about university cultures, organizational identity in universities, and human factor in university. What a context! What a context! I can see, and me and my colleague Michael Lisutkin, we have a paper on this issue, that we found several waves of university mergers in Russia, in post-Soviet Russia, because of course it's a very big history of mergers and another process in Soviet Union, but it's not my part of, it's not my agenda in research. The first wave was in 1990s, and it was a period when ex Soviet higher education institutions, they not all of them were universities, that were institutions, academies, teacher training institutes, art academies, and in this there was a first wave of university mergers in Russia in 1990s, because it was a part of their upside, not upside, it was a part of their initial program and initiative, just to survive in new economical and political context. The other part of university mergers was a very big, a very good funded program, federal universities in these years. You can see when it was a big program to establish super universities, which can be very competitive in international level, and to establish new university centers, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but in addition in Siberia, in Kaliningrad region, etc. The other part had another logic. So federal universities, they this reform was with the logic of super universities, with representations of new university units. This third wave was about and underperforming universities, we had a program of monitoring of higher education institution performance, where underperforming university should join to other universities. Then was a program regional flagship universities, and now it's just several days or several weeks of this of the beginning of the program, and everybody is very involved in the discussions about it. It's a new governmental program, Priority 2030, and we will have a new wave of mergers. So I was sure that with my with the finish and with the defense of my PhD, everything is done in this field, but not. And what about specifics? Because I began from a point that organizational identity makes sense, culture makes sense, but I'm sure that institutional level also makes sense for understanding these fluent and human and humanities issues. Because what about characteristics of university mergers in Russia? Uh, it's this classification or this list was written according to different international classifications of university mergers, so that the most part of mergers in Russia, they are top down. So it's not a program of a head of the university or head a region. That's except these cases of 1990s, the most part of mergers in Russia are top down and very quick, when universities should be involved in these big governmental programs and should merge. So I get that there are a lot of painful moments and moments of uncertainty and moments of conflict were because of these top-down and quick mergers. The other thing that these mergers are full mergers. What I mean, there are different forms of cooperation of higher education institutions. It can be informal cooperation where personalities of professors of or university administrations make sense, for example, about their friendship, so that common university courses or common student events. The next stage is consortiums or such a semi-merged systems when universities create common master programs, for example. But in our case, we usually have full mergers. So only two positions. You can be independent universities, or you can merge, or not you should merge in a full way, and for example, in a year or in 2 years from the start of a program, you should begin a common united university programs to have a new united campus, new norms, new rules, and new university professors and student body. I'm interested in organizational identity issues, and so I'm interested not because a lot of definitions of this identity stuff. So I'm interested not only in symbols or brand issues. I'm interested in identification and self-identification of members of the organization, and how they understand their position in university as an organization, and how they describe culture and traditions and history as a part of their organizational identity. But of course, I'm also interested in some brand things, because I looked at representation of universities themselves and university mergers in public sphere. So I looked how during the process of a merger, and after it, universities were represented in museums, in media, in their websites, etc. So because of my academic background in cultural studies and in organizational psychology, I really like organizational ethnography methods and ethnography and quality of research as a research strategy. So my big framework was multiple case study, and I looked and I studied 6 main cases. Three of them were finished by the moment of the research, and 3 of them were current or continued by the moment of research. Nowadays, every of them and each of them is finished. And I've tried to find very different cases. These universities, they are anonymized, but some of them were from Moscow, from St. Petersburg, from Siberia, from Tatarstan Republic, from Ural. They were very different in their size, in their academic directions, and so very, very, very different cases. And a lot of letters a lot of letters, and these are what types of methods of data collection I implemented. So in each case I did sometimes individual interviews, sometimes group interviews with graduates or with students, with university professors, with university administrations, where it will be possible. I did observation, participatory observation in some public events, like for example, days, we name it days of open doors in universities, when future students and their relatives can come and look what's going on in this university. And I looked at media, at university museums, at university websites. When I told to students and when I told to professors, I asked 3 types of questions. Some of them were about some objective situation, about what information they have about the university reorganization, what practices were implemented to them, what events about reorganization processes were done in one or another university, about their evaluation, about their opinion about these processes, and about identity issues and identification processes. So for example, what university is better for one or another student? Is it fair or unfair to to do such a reform? Or with one or another university, they can identify themselves before a merger or after a merger. And this is a lot of letters about what I looked at the process of representation of merged universities. And for me, it was very interesting part because there is no any manual, there are no any rules about how websites should be done after a merger. So every organization, every administration body in university can do whatever they want. And it's an interesting that in some cases, merging universities were represented as equal partners with common history, with big influence to each other. Maybe it wasn't so real in the process of a merger, but to a public sphere, to students, to in media, this merger represented as a union of equal and important partners. And in some cases, uh, uh, more not so big universities, not so famous or highly ranked universities, they just disappeared in this merger. And so that I've heard um, a lot of metaphors in the speech of my informants about dissolution, about um, loss themselves and their universities in these mergers. Um, so, um, what the results? And I guess some of them can be obvious for any organizational merger, and some problems can be very popular. But I can see some issues connected with the student position in university mergers. With there's a bigger context about quick mergers, top-down mergers, and with different practices of representations, this university merges to the public sphere to students. So several units of results after people who are interested in methodological issues. I analyzed observations results and diaries of observations and interview transcripts by the methods of grounded theory analysis, and then create a tree of memos and tree of categories describing this situation, the situation of university mergers in Russia from the student point of view, from the student voice, and from the human sides of universities. So the first category is uncertainty, anticipated negative or unclear impact, and sense of unfairness of situation. And the second thing is very strong attention to different aspects of university life. So that's attention to um, some material resources of universities, about campuses, about scholarships, about opportunities for internships. A lot of attention to obvious official and unofficial rules of the game in educational process, where the process is more strong, where the professors um, are more strong too. Will it be easier or will it be harder to defend master thesis or bachelor works in a new universities? A lot of attention to acculturative stress and clash of cultures. It's I guess that's a common process in any clash of different communities. For example, we can compare such a situation with an immigration situation when people understand what culture is important for them when they see other cultures, so that students and professors from different universities in the process of a merger or after a merger can understand what from what culture they are, and do they like it or do they not, and how they can see the culture of another universities, and a lot of talks about traditions, about some hidden curriculum, about some informal rules in one or another university. And one of the most painful and most actual process was a transformation of identity and identification. It was actualization of with a dichotomy, and that's interesting that of course of course, this identification processes were not symmetrical. In a situation of with a dichotomy, in a situation of uncertainty, in a situation when students and professors can see the other in another universities. Um, this new situation of identifications with all conflicts, etc., etc., um, were not symmetrical, and often it was described in the categories of winners and losers in universities reorganizations. So very often students of less prestigious universities described themselves as winners because of their chance to finish and to graduate from from highly ranking universities, and at the same they felt like losers because of the loss of their identity and culture. At the same time, the students of more prestigious universities describe them as losers because other people can reach their official results to graduate from the same universities, to receive the same diplomas, like students with, in their understanding, lower level of qualification. But to resume and to finish and to return to my stage and in the research about representations of university mergers and universities to the public sphere, I can say that this representations process and communication processes really make sense. And in such cases where communication policy were done were done well, where universities were represented like equal partners, and where a lot of work was done in the field of creating a new organizational identity, new name, new mission, new brand. This conflict processes and with a dichotomy were not so painful and were not so painful, so that some implications maybe they're obvious, but they are implemented very seldom. They are connected with communication policy, with special events, and with representation and organizational identity work on it. So I think that's a finish of my presentation. Um, 25 minutes, as we discussed. So I see some question from a chat.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Ksenia, I'll manage that for you. I'm going to ask you a question first, then we'll bring in Glenn. Now, this is a lot of work, like a lot of interviews, a lot of data, a lot of social media monitoring, a lot of documents to read. I mean, in the research process, and many of us have studied mergers this way. In the research process, what were the things that went very well for you, and where did you have problems in data gathering? What were the weaknesses in the study from your point of view? What were the things you might do differently if you started tomorrow?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Several things. The first issue, and I'm really interested in it as a, because I'm very interested in research methodology, is issues of um, power and issues of communication in higher education research, because I of course I've seen a lot of unclearness in my interviews with university administration, and a lot of very official answers, and sometimes I think maybe it will be better just to read some media resources, not to make an expert interviews. The other thing is more attention to some regulation processes moments, to look better at laws, at official documents, not media, but official documents in mergers, but they are not in a public space. So it's rather difficult to find these things. And the other point, I think it's about my position in the field, because when I started this research, I was a PhD student, and now I'm an assistant professor and head of master program. And of course, I understand that in the beginning of the research, I had so many identification with students as a group in university. So I've seen maybe more identity with their problems, and with their with their, conflict position to university administration. And now from another position, I guess I can be not so radical in translation of students' opinions. Yeah, so I think these things.
Mhm. I mean, as I said, I think many of us have looked at mergers, and I do want to encourage people who've studied mergers to come into the discussion, because they're all different, and there's also certain similarities, aren't there? Let me ask one more question before I bring in Glenn Chatelia. I've noticed that, and I want to test this hypothesis with you, because you've looked at both mergers between equals and mergers between unequals. I've noticed that when you've got one dominant partner, and this applies as much to the level of putting together two business schools or two engineering schools as it does to two institutions. When you've got one dominant partner that absorbs the other and doesn't have to change very much, it seems to go a bit more smoothly than when you've got two fairly equal partners. Both have to be looked after, both have claims, both might even want to control the name of the institution, or both might want the presidency of the institution. I mean, it seems to be more difficult when you've got an equal balance. Was that your feeling?
Um, and this, and not exactly. I think that in a situation with a bigger, famous, and influential universities, some processes can be done more quickly, and maybe not without so many conflicts, because there is a person or an institution which can formulate what's going on. But then they will have other problems in the process after a merger, with identification, with this dissolutions of units and students and professors. And at the same time, with the representations of a kind of equal partners, they can have more conflicts and more identity rivalry in the process of the merger. But if conflicts can be discussed, and they can have more interesting and more fair situation. But not exactly, because in my case, it's a very very famous university in Russia, in a capital of rather big region in Russia. They really have like two different universities in a city. Officially they have a new name, but everybody name departments and universities by their old names, and they have duplicated departments, and professors translate to their students that we are better chemistries than chemistries from other universities. And so that they kind of equal partners, but not all the processes were implemented and finished in a better way.
And it depends a bit on the case, doesn't it? I guess when all comes down to it, you can't generalize too freely. Glenn Chatelier is our first Q&A participant. Glenn, how is he? I've been talking to him in the chat, so I know he's there. There he is. Glenn, your question, please.
Sorry for that slight delay. Ksenia, I was really interested in your presentation, and thank you for the onerous work that you've done. In acquisitions or even mergers of university structures, two entities coming together, wouldn't you see the transfer of knowledge as one of the valuable, outcomes of such mergers? Number one. And number two, we sort of deal with two different types of knowledge, the implicit and the explicit. Okay, and obviously your study may have just been measuring the explicits instead of, or with a less focus on the implicit, okay, which I think would involve policy, strategy, and the direction, okay, that institutions take. Could you comment a little bit on these dimensions if you did perceive them?
Thank you. Thank you for your mark of my work, and sorry that I can answer in a full way because knowledge transfer wasn't the focus of my research, and it was a position not to look at outcomes, at measured outcomes, for example, like academic publications or results of new united laboratories. Maybe it will be a next stage of my research. The other thing about knowledge when we are talking about teacher and learning processes, also not exactly. I have only subjective positions about what is harder in education, or what is better, or is one or another professors can teach better. So I can't measure it, unfortunately, and I guess that it will be, but it's very interesting for me, and I'm interested in knowledge and education results. Maybe we can measure it after several years when your reorganizations will be finished. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Ksenia. Can we bring in Doria now? Doria Abdallah. I think you're staying off camera, Doria, but you can speak into the microphone, yeah? Doria. I wonder if we got a connection.
But I can read a command
We've
myself.
got Doria's question. Did you review how the narratives on merger were transmitted from universities to the student population? Did you review how narratives on merger were transmitted from universities to the students? Was there misunderstanding about the merger among students? Did that generate negativity?
Of course, I get that it's one of my results about this global misunderstanding in a situation of uncertainty, when there is no any logical, official or unofficial manuals and or to-do lists. And my dream to create a to-do list for university reorganization, where every moment can be explained, and when there is no space for gossips, when everybody can when professors came to students and tell them that we will be hired and you will be studied by other professors and they will hate you, etc., etc. Of course, a lot of misunderstanding, and I think that it's a point of many problems in university research. And so that cases where some organizational identity job were done when new mission was formulated, new name can be created, some groups of students or professors were asked to express their opinions, they have more interesting and more comfort situation and during the process of emergence and after that.
Thank you, Ksenia. John Anker is our next Q&A participant. John, please. Here he is.
Thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. You've talked a lot about the role of institutional status in the merger process and people's perceptions of institutional status as well. I have a first degree from the University of Manchester in the UK and a PhD from the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, which merged together in 2004. And there were various reasons put forward for why the merger might have been a good idea. And probably the most dominant narrative was to become a top 50 world research university. Now, I just wonder in your investigations whether you have looked at all at institutional performance. I know that your research is about student views in the way that you presented it today, but I guess in the background, you will have looked at some maybe performance measures. Performance is a difficult sort of thing to measure because there are so many different measures of it. And in the example that I've given, I think we could say there's been a considerable amount of success, but teaching has suffered in the merged institution, as most people would agree.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your answer. It's a very important answer, and I will tell two things. The first one, I will be kind of a promo. My answer will be promo for a next seminar because my colleague Alexei in a week will tell exactly about this wave of mergers, about underperforming universities and their results before university mergers and after university mergers in a quantitative strategy. The other thing about this performance and about this underperforming universities, it's not my category. It's very technocratically explained categories of state policy in higher education in Russia. So every university should explain their performance in academic publications, in the number of student body, and the number of international students. And if they are underperforming, they should be amalgamated by other universities, and this wave is finished, and it was a part of a bigger higher education policy because in 1990s when state control wasn't so strong, and it was a period of massive, extremely big and extremely extremely massification and marketization of higher education. It was a kind of struggle of very different, strange, new, old, kind of weak universities. For example, universities which can be described as diploma factories, and it was a form of their soft soft dissolution, I can say this, but I guess more information will be in a week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I haven't given Phil Altback a warning that I'm about to bring him into the Q&A, but he's just popped in with something in the chat. So, Phil, would you like to come in at this point on camera? Thanks.
Sure. Here's probably an impossible question from this really interesting work. And I'd just like to underline the importance of looking at mergers because there are so many of them and it's so complicated. And you know, it's a global trend for many good reasons and maybe some not so good reasons. But here's the question. From your research and also from your broader reading, since you're now a world expert on mergers, what's the secret of success, if there's any? So can you give me the what we call in the States the elevator pitch? You know, the brief summary of what we can do. And if you are able to do this while we're going up in the elevator, you definitely get a Nobel Prize. Thank you.
Thank you,
That'd
Philip.
be the Peace Prize, I suppose.
I you know is you know, I guess I have no success story, but I have some advices and some implication to do it not good, to do this process maybe not good but not so bad. I can say this. And that stories about communication and in a very different way. And I think a lot of informal no, not informal communication with students, not only with students who are representing some student offices or student representations body, and there's common events with common tasks where professors and students should can meet each other and can do common academic or educational tasks before a merger. And I think the very important part of success to and we haven't it now in a new wave of a merger, an opportunity to return it back, not to merge if conflicts begin, if if results of research say that it shouldn't be done, etc. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think important about communication is obviously central. Perhaps it always is, you know, in these large communities. You know, it's always a core aspect of good management, leadership, and administration is good communication. It's part of teaching and learning too. But it seems to me that going beyond that, you know, you probably need to look at expectations. And I mean, if a group of people from an emerging institution feel that their status, perhaps their resources and so on are going to be lifted by the merger, then they're going to be put a lot of positive energy into it. That can be a real driver. If they go into a merger thinking that they're going to be unchanged or they're going to remain supreme top dog in the merged institution when they're not, and their expectations are disappointed, then that can lead to a lot of pushback. And I think also that, as you mentioned yourself, I mean, that sense that there's no alternative is a powerful driver. If you think you can undo the merger or you can refuse it, then you may act quite differently. And of course, so it's true that some mergers don't happen, some come unstuck. You know, there are cases where mergers occur and there's just ferocious conflict and pushback, and then after 2 or 3 years, they get undone again. I mean, that does happen sometimes. So, I mean, constituents, staff and students in a merger can make a difference. So they're pretty important players. But I think, you know, if you want to lead a successful merger, you need to manage expectations really, really well to get the best result. I'm going to bring Glenn Chatilia back in. I think he's got more things to say. Glenn, do come in now if you can.
Thank you, Simon. I would like to just know, in your study, did you come across any instances of the submersion of one academic culture over another in the merger, okay, for the sake of the success, overall of the merger itself? Okay, it seems to me that so much of academia is rooted in the clash of cultures. Okay, and I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit in the investigation of your subjects or study. Did you come across any instances?
I will try, as I understand your question, right? And maybe it will be also an answer to a question from chat. No, it's also your answer about clash points. I can remember several ones. What's very important, as I can say, about academical issue, it's position of universities according to academic dishonesty, and what is right and what is wrong in different academical situation. And I know that a lot of conflicts were because of the students of merged universities, for example, didn't know how to be academically successful in a place with a higher level of education and with a stronger rules against academic dishonesty. The first thing. The other thing, I can see clash points between universities with more applied focus or research applied focus and of their disciplines, and with universities with a more academically developed culture. And because it's not only about the content of educational curriculum, it's also about values of knowledge they receive in universities. And the other part, and maybe the third thing, that's not the final point of my list, it's some traditions, rituals, stories, festivals, which can be more important in one university and not so important in another. And I'm saying about it not because I'm from cultural studies and I'm interested in rituals, but because there's importance of festivals and concerts, etc., etc. It's also a part of academical culture in one places, and where students active in some art or sport activities can be successful. And this is not a value, and this is not an explanation of your academical unsuccess in other universities. And a lot of conflicts in students' body between students of different universities, they connected with these academical values, which are hidden in different practices like dishonesty or like events. Yeah.
Ksenia, a couple more from me. One is a small one and the other is a big one. The small one is about graduates. One of the things that's always troubled me about the merger process is that you know, especially when you've got established longer term institutions, degrees have identity. You know, the name of the institution has identity, and when that name disappears and the degree changes its meaning in some ways, perhaps that disadvantages graduates. Perhaps in some cases it elevates them. You know, that they can claim they're associated with this bigger, better, more famous institution. Did you collect any evidence around that graduate factor?
Oh, yes, and it was one of the most important factor in two situations. For future graduates, when students explain their attention to merger processes according to this diploma factory, and it wasn't pure credentialism that it's okay for me because of the diploma or not. And the second point about graduates, when I've seen in my interviews when this identification with the universities can be changed or not be changed after graduation because of this cultural capital and symbolic capital issues. And I have a lot of answers about people who say that they graduate from a merged university or from a big university in a merger because it's their chance for job hunting, etc.
Yeah, I think there's a nice paper in that, mergers, employability and institutional reputation. That alone is a big topic. Now, my other question, which is a larger question, is about, what the merger program's done for the country, for higher education as a whole. I mean, I realize that this is partly an efficiency issue, and we'll talk about that next Tuesday. But I mean, do you think that the mergers you've seen, are they strengthening the relationship between higher education and their communities? Is it creating a better sector? Is it bringing countries' higher education system forward? Is it working? Is the merger program working from your point of view?
I don't know. It's honest. I guess that it was working in officially, and next seminar will be about it. The situation is better, more academical publication, more stronger publications and scientists, etc. But I think that, and because of this, we should do qualitative research, that the reasons of this moving forward, not in the merger itself, but in an extra funding for merger, because of the attention from a community, from parents of students, from state, regional or federal. And of course, we can see, a measured success of mergers, but I think that some of these reasons not because of a merger, but because of the bigger state program.
Right. It's always difficult to disentangle the different causes and effects that are going on, isn't it? Now, let me just ask you, as I think we're winding up, let me ask you one more question. Your own work, I mean, where do you go from here? Are you continuing to research mergers in your own research program, or are you moving on to other things now?
I'm continuing applied research in this field, and I'm trying to make it more useful. And that's about Philip's answer and about this success elevator. Now, as an applied researcher, I'm trying to find some implications and some to-do lists for future research. But my heart is in research about university culture, where merger can be just a conflict situation where this university culture can be visible.
And of course, I'm aware of your work on culture because you've jointly authored a chapter on higher education and its cultural contribution for a book which we're currently preparing on the contributions of higher education, which is, I might say, you'll be pleased to know, near completion. So we've just got 3 chapters to sort of finish off, and then we're going to be off to the publisher, I would think, within 4 weeks or so, with your chapter in tow. Now, Ksenia, that was really good. I think you answered the questions really, really well, and we've got a much better idea of how to go about a study of mergers at this time as a result of hearing you discuss yours. Colleagues, next Tuesday, we return to mergers in Russia for a second of the 2 webinars on this topic, and we look more directly at efficiency questions around mergers. And a great controversy around mergers is that they mostly absorb more resources than they free up. You might think there are efficiencies when you combine two business schools together, but often you end up paying for both for quite a considerable period of time, and so on. So sometimes there are savings in IT or administration, but perhaps not on the academic side, sometimes the other way around. But Tomaso Agastisi and Alexei Ugorov will take us through their study of efficiency and the Russian merger program, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you again, Ksenia. That was a really good. We'll have you back to talk about culture at some stage, I hope. And thanks to everyone who participated in this excellent discussion. Say bye for now and see you next Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.